Hello again to all my friends. Here we are again, and today I want to cover slavery in the Bible. Now, I know this topic has been done to death by every single atheist with a YouTube channel, but this is not the aim of today's video. The aim of today's video is to take a look at what the original Hebrew and Greek were looking at when they spoke about slavery, and what counter there is to the apologetics regarding slavery. One of the frustrating things for me about translations in the Bible is where one word in English is used for several different words in the original Hebrew and Greek. Several words in Hebrew and sometimes several words in Greek. But when it comes to English translation, it is one word. And when that one word is used, it is usually used incorrectly. In this example, the one English word is slave. Slave is used across the board, but it doesn't refer to the same thing in every instance. And I want to do a breakdown and look at the original Hebrew, the original Greek, and see what it was exactly they were referring to. I also want to take a look at the apologetic arguments against slavery in the Bible and see where these apologists are wrong and why they are wrong. So the first apologetic that I want to take a look at is they weren't slaves, they were working off a debt. What they are talking about here is indentured servitude, and yes, this was a thing. Somebody who fell into debt arranged to work for his creditor for a fixed period of time without income to pay off that debt. The Hebrew word for this is eved, and it is defined as a bondservant or laborer, someone who is bound in service without wages, and it is derived from the verb abad, meaning to work or serve. So which verses are applicable to eved? Deuteronomy 23:15, Exodus 21:2, Leviticus 25:39, Exodus 21 verse 20 to 21, Exodus 21 verses 26 to 27. The word slave here isn't slave as we know slave. That word is doulos. Indentured servants or eved didn't have it as bad as slaves as we know them. They were only to work for 6 years and to be released on the 7th. And when they were released, they were given a fair amount of supplies to be able to start a new life with. They were to be given liberally from the flock, the threshing floor, and the winepress. Before I move on, there are two other forms of slavery besides indentured servitude that I would like to bring up that are in the Bible, but are not the slavery as we know slavery. The first one is oiketes, which means household servant, and the second is found in Exodus 21:7, where a man can sell his daughter into slavery. This slavery is called ormo, meaning maidservant. These might or might not take the form of traditional slavery, but they are not intended as the original slavery that we know of. The second apologetic I always hear against slavery in the Bible is somebody who steals another person must be put to death. Correct. It does say that in 1 Timothy 1 verse 10, although in the NIV it says kidnappers, and in the King James Version it refers to men stealers. The original word for this is andrapodistes, which means kidnapper or slave trader. The word used here to steal a man is ganav, which interestingly is the same word that is used in the Ten Commandments when it says, "Thou shalt not steal." So this raises an interesting question. How were slaves acquired? The first form is indentured servitude or eved, but we've dealt with this already, so I'm going to move on to the second one. Another way to get your hands on a slave would be to buy them. They can be purchased as possessions or merchandise called amer. Yeah, the Bible specifically states that they can be purchased either from the heathen or the nations around you, depending on which version you read. The word used in the Bible for this is goy. Temporary residents from among the Hebrew could also be bought, and these are specifically your possessions, or ahuzah. The third way they can be received is as inheritance. You can bequeath in your will the slaves to your children, and they will be their possession for life as well. And the fourth way to get your hands on a slave is as plunder in war. In many instances in the Bible, the Israelites are instructed, as in Numbers 31 verses 9 to 11, Numbers 31 verses 35, and Deuteronomy 20 verse 14, to take slaves as plunder of war. Unsurprisingly, very often these are either women and children, or more often young, unwed, virgin women who are to be taken as captive. Now, I'm sure there's many apologists who would argue very eloquently that these women are taken for household chores or to tend the garden, but it seems very clear they're to be kept as sex slaves. The third apologetics argument I want to deal with is God doesn't condone slavery. As a matter of fact, there are verses in the Bible where slave owners are instructed to set their slaves free. This is true. The book of Philemon, for example, tells about a slave called Onesimus who ran away from his slave owner Philemon and ran away to Rome. And in doing so, either by chance or deliberately, he came across Paul, the disciple, where Paul converted Onesimus to Christianity, and he sent Onesimus back to Philemon with a letter asking him to release him from his slavery so that he can come and continue the work that he was set to do by Paul in furtherance of Christianity. This is hardly an argument against slavery. These are specific instances where Paul, for example, is writing to a specific friend, asking for a unique case of the freedom of the slave for his own specific purpose. Interestingly, the word for slave in the case of Philemon is Dulos, which is slave in the fullest extent of the word that we know it. The next and the last of the apologetics against slavery that I want to take a look at is, well, the biblical slavery was nothing like the slavery of the American South. Now, being non-American myself, I'm certainly in no position to argue about the treatment of slaves in the American South. But I am in a position to argue about the treatment of slaves in biblical times using the Bible as reference. And this is where I come to the crux of my video on slavery. I'm speaking about all the instances of slavery as we know it. I'm not speaking about indentured servitude. I'm not speaking about household servants. I'm not speaking about maid servants. I'm speaking here about the slavery of subjugation and ownership. The slavery of Dulos and Duleia. Dulos is derived from the verb deo, meaning to bind or tie. By far the greatest number of verses in the Bible referencing slavery refers to Dulos and Duleia. This is slavery in the traditional captivity and ownership sense. Alright, so let's go over a couple of the instructions that were given to the slaves that they were expected to adhere to. Instructions are given to teach slaves to be subject to their masters, to please them, to not talk back, and to not steal. Slaves are to submit to their masters, especially the cruel ones. They are to respect their masters, to obey their earthly masters. They are forced to worship Yahweh, and they all had to be circumcised. So how were slaves to be treated? Disobedient slaves were to be beaten with many blows. If the slave is aware of the master's will and disobeys, he is to receive many blows. If the slave is unaware of the master's will and disobeys, he is to be beaten with few blows. Let's take a moment to reflect on this. What these two verses are saying is that if a slave knows that he's doing wrong, he will receive many blows. If he doesn't know he's doing wrong, he's to receive few blows. Why is he to be punished at all if he doesn't know that he's doing anything wrong? If a master beats a slave with a rod and the slave dies, the master is to be punished. If the slave survives for a day or two, the slave is not to be punished. I'd like to reflect on this for a moment as well. If a slave is beaten so badly that he lies in a coma for a week and then dies, the owner is not to be punished. A slave could be beaten to within an inch of his life And there too, the owner has no punishment. It's not only the beating of slaves with a rod. There are so many other ways of hurting somebody. Slaves could be whipped, punched, kicked, burnt, or starved, all at the whim of their master. Even if they did nothing wrong, if the master just didn't like them, he could cruelly punish them for no reason and no punishment for himself. I will grant it was in the best interest of the slaveholder to keep the slaves as healthy as possible for productivity's sake. An injured, sick slave is not producing for you. But they could be punished for little to no reason and as severely as the owner feels fit. So it's true, I cannot comment on the American slavery of the South, but if it was nearly as bad as the biblical slaves had it, then it was inhumane and intolerable. So as we can see, God does condone slavery, or at least the Bible, which is professed to speak on his behalf, condones slavery. There's no question about it. We're not talking about indentured servitude. We're not talking about housemaids. We're not talking about household servants. We are talking about Dulos and Duleia, the slavery as we know it, the slavery of captivity and forced labor, of receiving no compensation for your labor, for being beaten, starved, mistreated in any form, with no retribution to the owner. Slavery was and is evil, and any apologetic that says anything different is condoning it as well. Once again, thank you, my friends, for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And if you have subscribed, I would love it if you could share this with somebody else. Keep well, and I'll speak to you soon.